In a previous video, I demonstrated how to make a semi-classic bechamel, which is taught in culinary schools today, but is by no means the original, and there is a little bit of a debate, but one story goes that it was created by the court chef of Louis de Bechamel, and then this guy, Carême, got his hands on it and turned it into a velouté that was basically thickened with cream and a liaison, which is cream and egg yolks, and then Escoffier turned it into a milk-based sauce, but as a throwback to Carême's version, he added veal chunks. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make Escoffier's version, which is using some milk. So we're starting with a quart of milk and then some. A quarter of an onion, but this time it's going to be minced instead of whole, as we showed in the last video. 2 to 4 ounces of veal. I figure if you're going to go through the trouble of buying veal, you may as well use 4 ounces instead of 2, right? And then some whole butter to fry the minced onion and the veal in. And then you're also going to be using 4 ounces of roux. And Escoffier's version of roux is 9 ounces of flour to 8 ounces of clarified butter. But you can use the eyeball method like we talked about in the previous bechamel video. Now you're also going to be seasoning with white pepper and kosher salt, whole nutmeg grated fresh into the sauce right at the end. And you'll be simmering a couple sprigs of thyme in the sauce instead of the clove and the bay leaf. Now you're going to start just as before by adding the cold milk to a heavy bottom sauce pot. And sometimes people like to combine the roux at this stage. It doesn't really matter. You just got to keep on whisking it to make sure it combines thoroughly so it doesn't lump or stick to the bottom of the pot. I prefer to bring my milk to a simmer. Now in a separate pan, you're going to melt some butter over moderate heat and wait for that to gently melt. You don't really want a whole lot of color on the butter. In fact, you don't want any. And once it starts to kind of bubble, you're going to place your minced onion into the butter, and you're going to fry the minced onion in the butter along with the chunks of white veal. Now, the whole purpose is to cook the white veal in the butter with the onions so their flavors combine. And this is going to be a flavor enhancer for your sauce. The onions will start to cook down, become sweet and translucent, but you do not want to brown either the veal or the onions because you are making a white sauce. Now, it's just my guess that Escoffier, this was a throwback to Carême's version. So Carême was normally using a velouté or a veal-based sauce or a chicken or a stock-based sauce to make his bechamel, versus Escoffier just throws in some veal. So once your milk comes to a simmer, you're going to add in your 4 ounces of roux, and you want to make sure that you whisk to combine thoroughly and bring it back up to a simmer to reach your full thickening potential and double check its consistency. And after about 7 to 8 minutes of cooking, notice how the onions have softened and changed color a little bit, but they're not dark or they're not brown in any way. And you're just going to skim those out of the butter using a slotted spoon. If you get a little bit of that butter in there in your sauce, it's not a big deal because the roux, as it thickens, will just emulsify that butter into the sauce and just give it a little bit more flavor. Now you're going to drop in a couple sprigs of thyme and then do a final consistency check. Again, you're going to be simmering this for an hour. So you want a nice loose nappe just like this. And then you simmer for an hour on very low heat and then pass through. I like to use a larger strainer first just to remove most of the large chunks and just use a rubber spatula to scrape out any extra that you have on the sides there. Go ahead and push that through because you're going to do a final strain through a chinois to ensure a fine texture and consistency. So once you do a final strain through the chinois, just like you do in any number of sauce making techniques, you want to go ahead and give that chinois a tap on the rim so the shaking motion and the force of that tapping passes the liquid or the sauce through without pushing through any chunks, which is going to ensure that you have a nice velvety smooth consistency. Now here I'm looking at my consistency and I'm saying to myself, this looks a little too thick for me, for my personal preference, which is no big deal. You can easily go back and just thin it out with a little bit of warm milk. In contrast, if your bechamel is too thin, you can simply place it back on the stove and allow it to simmer for a little while longer until it reduces down to the proper thickness. Now, if you decide to add more roux at this point to thicken the sauce further, you're going to need to simmer it for at least 20 minutes to make sure that you cook out the raw flour taste. Now here you're going to finish with a little bit of freshly grated nutmeg just as before. And again, that's to add complexity of flavor, not to actually make the sauce taste like nutmeg. Season with a little bit of kosher salt, a little bit of white pepper, and then just give that a stir. You want to check for the final seasoning, check for the final flavoring. When you taste the sauce, you're going to notice a nice little back hit and that little sweetness of the onions from the onions being sweated before they were put into the sauce, and also that nice meaty flavor of the white veal stock. It'll be very, very subtle, but it'll definitely be there. Now, one thing, if you're going to hold this online for a couple of hours before you serve it or before you turn it into a secondary sauce, you can simply cover it just by placing some plastic wrap right on top to keep a skin from forming. For more information on bechamel sauce and for this episode's show notes, head on over to stellaculinary.com/SNS9.